Hi. Don't applaud when you don't. I might bore you. Don't applaud. Thank you very much. It is fabulous to be with all of you, honestly. I have learned so much in such a short time. Don't you feel as though your brains ache? I mean, but good aching, not the kind of ache where you have to take Bayer aspirin, but, you know, good aching. Can we start by thanking the signers? They've been just fabulous. I have this strong sense that I sound better through them, right? It's wonderful to be here. When the nice, wonderful, quite miraculous organizers asked if I would be part of this event, I thought of what is it that I'm actually paying a lot of attention to these days. I mean, I try to pay attention to a lot of things. And one of the things that I find myself just coming back to again and again, and I think it's partly because I live it, just like many of us live it, and that is living within institutions. Most of us who have paid jobs or who do volunteer work or are part of some other social civic organizations live within institutions at least part of our daily lives. And I think increasingly that as feminists, we need to share our ideas, our hunches, and our solutions about how patriarchy works its way through the institutions that we live our lives in, some of which institutions we actually are very attached to. Not just the institutions we think are hostile environments, but also institutions that we think of as progressive or as at least enhancing our own lives. And so let me start with raised eyebrows. I'm very interested in raised eyebrows. Most of you have had probably too many hours spent in meetings, right? Who here has been in a meeting in the last 2 weeks? You've been in a meeting. See, look at this, really. It is the universal experience of feminists to spend time in meetings. Well, meetings, you know, can be quite exasperating. They can be oftentimes quite boring. But the thing is, you always have the feeling you better be there. And as feminists, one of the things we've learned is you always get to the meeting before the meeting, you know, that kind of where the jokes occur, where the banter occurs, where the gossip occurs. And then you also have to carve out time so that you stay a little after the meeting, because then there's another meeting. It's where people say to each other what just happened. And I always think if you get late to meetings, you've missed some of the workings of patriarchy that inform the meeting. And if you have to leave too quickly, which a lot of overworked women have to do, one of the things we miss is we miss how whatever good, perhaps, sometimes it does, whatever good happened at the meeting can be unraveled in about 30 seconds after the meeting by somebody makes a joke about what you thought just was accomplished, or somebody just makes a snide remark about something that was achieved. And in that, you have a delegitimation of what just you thought was a successful meeting. So I'm very interested in meetings, and I wish I were trained as an anthropologist. Actually, I have kind of a wish. My wish would be that I would come back in another life and I would be a feminist, historically minded ethnographer. That would really, right? That's a pretty good aspiration, isn't it? But I'm a lowly, very lowly political scientist who's had to learn all these feminist skills from anthropologists and from historians and from everybody else who feels as though they're smarter than political scientists. We have a lot to learn, we political scientists. But one of the things I've learned is that to think like an ethnographer at a meeting, all right? Watch the culture of a meeting. And I'm very interested in, picture yourself at your not-so-favorite meeting, right? somebody says something that actually you think is really, wow, that's pretty intelligent. I hadn't thought of that. That's pretty innovative. That's pretty helpful. And just as she has said that, two people who don't say a thing to each other, they don't raise their hand to comment, two people sitting across from each other, just as that very smart woman has made that comment, they just look at each other and go, does that show up on the screen? Right? Right? Just the kind of, right? Without saying a thing, that very smart comment has been undermined. And of course it never appears in the minutes, which of course is one of the reasons why historians are driven crazy by meetings, because minutes from meetings are always cleaned up and they're never written by ethnographers. So the raised eyebrow is never covered in the meeting, not to mention the meeting before the meeting is never covered in the minutes, and the meeting after the meeting is never covered in the minutes. So I think we should really develop a whole new institutional minute-taking strategy. Let the people do the minutes the way they usually do the minutes, and then let us do alternative minutes. And they will start 5 minutes before the meeting. They will engage with every gesture during the meeting, right? And they will stay for at least 2 minutes after the meeting, and then have that be the record, the feminist record of what just happened in that meeting. If you try this in any of your organizations, do me a favor and send me a copy. I would love, it's a whole new feminist minute-taking skill, but it would show why things that looked as though they were accomplished in a meeting, in fact, are never implemented, are never, quote, taken seriously. And I'll come back to taken seriously in a minute. Amongst the people who have really taught us that we have to pay attention to not just institutional rules and institutional structures, but also institutional cultures. And the fact that we even use the term institutional culture, which now, is it used in Swedish and Danish and Icelandic and Finnish? Is institutional culture now a term that makes sense in your own languages? Yeah? That's new. That's new. I'm not really a good enough historian to be sure about this, but I don't think if you read 1950s literature on organizations and institutions, I'm not sure you would see that phrase, institutional culture. One of the reasons that it's become one of our tools, especially our feminist tools, to make sense of how institutions behave and why patriarchy is so renewable. You know, one of the things that's really underestimated about patriarchy is that we talk about sustainable development, and we usually think that's a good thing, but actually patriarchy is very sustainable, right? We should be very wary of when we use sustainable, right? Because it depends what you're sustaining, right? So it's very curious to all of us. I know all of us think about this all the time. How is it, despite all our thinking, all our smart activism, all our networking within societies and between societies, how is it that within particular institutions, patriarchy is so sustainable? And I think one of the reasons it's sustainable is because it works through institutional cultures, not just institutional structures and institutional policies and rules. So, one of the groups that really I think we are so indebted to, and one of the leaders of this movement, Catherine McKinnon, is with us today and will be speaking next, is that the movement, or many movements around the world, that crafted the idea of sexual harassment, put the two words together in ways that humankind had never put together before in any language. Those people, lawyers, feminist activists, people working in grassroots organizations of all kinds, one of the things that they gave to us is an understanding that if you are going to prevent sexual harassment in workplaces and schools and other forms of institutions, including parliaments, If you're going to stop sexual harassment, you cannot stop at just changing the structure of who can make a complaint to whom, what are the procedures by which that complaint has to be addressed. Those are important. I never underestimate either rule-making or structures. They're important. But people who were activists around sexual harassment began to watch that even though they accomplished some of those changes, in fact, sexual harassment continued. Not just continued, meaning that a coworker sexually abused another coworker, but rather also that their supervisors, their mid-level and senior supervisors, continued to not take it seriously. And so sexual harassment activists began to say, how come? What is it that we haven't addressed that seems to make sexual harassment and the demeaning of women so sustainable? And they began to say, let's look at the cultures of the organization, not just the rules and the structures of organizations. And the reason I think, check this out, everybody who's a journalist out there or is looking for a term paper assignment, but I think that one of the reasons that we now, so many of us, use institutional culture as a way to make sense of institutions is because of the work done by anti-sexual harassment activists. And they began to say, okay, what happens within organizations that sustains that set of beliefs and practices despite our successes in changing the rules, despite us introducing a sexual harassment officer in the structure? And what they found was that you had to look at jokes. You had to look at gestures. You had to look at ways in which bonding occurs not just in the workplace, that's important, but also outside of work between workmates. And this really broadened our politics of how you change institutions to the point that now you can hear officials in the US Pentagon will talk about trying to change military culture as if they made up the idea, right? But it is a much more subtle and a much more stubborn problem to try and change culture. So for instance, let me give you one example of culture. And that is, and this is one that I actually have been spending some time thinking about, and that is who is taken seriously and what is taken seriously. Seriously is such a loaded idea. If you are taken seriously, that's a great reward, right? If you are not taken seriously, especially if you can see that you are not taken seriously inside an institution, it feels humiliating, it's demoralizing, and oftentimes you want to leave the institution. But who gets to bestow seriousness, right? Who gets to say that was a serious comment, or that's a serious suggestion, or that's a serious proposal for change? I call them the bestowers, right? Who gets to bestow seriousness on anybody? Because you can be as serious as you desperately want to be, but in fact, you don't get to decide whether what you are proposing will be taken seriously. In that sense, seriousness is like beauty. It's in the eye of, I would say, in the hands of the bestowers. Other people get to decide what's taken seriously. Within institutions, it is one of the great cultural dynamics in an institution. Who gets to say what and whom will be taken seriously? For a lot of women in institutions, that search for, that effort, and it takes a lot of effort to try and be taken seriously, can also lead to co-optation, right? That is, in your effort, in my effort, in any of our efforts to try and be taken seriously, what you find yourself doing is you think a lot about the minds of the bestowers. In fact, you begin to think more about the minds of the bestowers than you do about your own feminist allies in the organization. And you begin to think, oh, they won't take me seriously if I dress like mm-mm. They won't take me seriously if I use the word patriarchy, for sure. They won't take me seriously if I couch my proposal in feminist terms. They'll only take me seriously in the meeting or when I talk to my supervisor. They'll only take me seriously if I couch my proposal in what's good for the institution's mission. And therefore, anything I propose, I have to frame as good for the institution. Now, most of us do that. I certainly have done it. You know, we need more women on the political science faculty because my university will look, you know, backward if it only has 2 women and 9 men or something, right? But just think of what that means. It means that you argue for taking sexual assault in a military, that is, male soldiers on female soldiers, assault in a military. You argue that it should be taken seriously by the senior commanders for the good of the military. That is the way in which you think you can most make your argument in a way that your argument will be taken seriously, that it won't be dismissed, that it won't be trivialized, that it won't be the object of ridicule or a joke. And what you find yourself doing is making a proposal for what you really think is enhancing the dignity and the human rights of your coworkers, not in terms of their rights or their dignity, but in terms of the institution's own mission. We do this all the time. You have to find some way to frame your argument so that people who otherwise don't want to take you seriously will at least pause for a moment and think, oh, I hadn't realized it would actually jeopardize our mission, right? But think of how that shrinks what your real impetus for making this argument is. So the struggle to be taken seriously, and I don't mean you shouldn't frame it that way. Sometimes you'll do anything because the issue is so important, you'll do anything to make it be taken seriously by people who really have more influence in the organization than you. But just think of what it means if other people get to bestow seriousness on your proposal and you spend most of your time trying to mind read them, trying to think of what makes them nervous, what makes them proud, what makes them feel like they're the big, guy on the block, what makes them feel as though they're accomplished, what makes them feel as though they're sophisticated, what makes them feel as though they're professional, sometimes what makes them feel heroic, right? And you find yourself spending time trying to mind read the bestowers. I put this out there not because we automatically know how to get around this conundrum, but because we should talk about it. That is, we should talk about what compromises, sometimes called framing, what kinds of compromises do we make, with what consequences within every organization in order to be taken seriously. If you talk about it, you might come up with alternatives. If you talk about it, you may frame it in that way, that is, the organization's mission will be enhanced if you take seriously something that you've usually reduced to jokes. But you will also be ready to catch people with influence in the organization or your coworkers when they begin to adopt it solely for that purpose and completely ignore the main reason that you had for proposing this in the first place. Institutional cultures are very hard to change by simply rules. It means that within organizations, and you probably do a lot of this in your own organizations, you are every single day at the coffee machine. You are every single day just before the meeting. You are at every single day if you're on a hiring committee. You are trying to actually catch the institution making patriarchal assumptions. Catch your coworkers bestowing rewards on people for doing things that actually you think are harmful to women and supportive of patriarchy. Feminism, I think, is so potent, is so empowering, because it gives us political activism to do every day. Not just when there's a formal campaign going on, but when a comment is made, everyone else laughs around the coffee machine at the meeting before the meeting, and you have to decide whether you will laugh. Will you laugh or not, right? Every bit of applause just then was nervous, wasn't it? Because you want to get along with your workmates, and you do have to decide which jokes do you not quite approve of, but they're not really as awful as they could be. So you'll kind of give a half-hearted chuckle. And which comments by which of your workmates will you think, okay, it's beyond the pale. It's not only that I need to say something to him or her, because that is such a racist comment, even if it's said in a lighthearted way, or such a sexist comment said so offhand, so casually, and you think you must say something. And the reason you usually, any of us, feel you have to say something is not just because you don't want that person to get away with thinking that's okay to say in this workplace or in this organization. Oftentimes, you speak up, even when it's awkward, even when I think, uh-oh, they thought I was a team player. They are about to hear I am actually not a team player, right? You speak up because you are worried about the 4 people standing around the joke maker. The 4 people, if you say nothing, their notion of what's acceptable, in fact, even what's bonding in this institutional culture, those roots will go down another inch deeper. It's not just the joke maker. It's not just you feeling silenced. It is also the other hearers who chuckle, and in their gentle laughter, or maybe uproarious laughter, they are in fact not just confirming the institutional culture, they're driving the institutional culture of patriarchy in that workplace deeper. So my sense is that institutional cultures are places that we can do feminist work every day. But it should be feminist work that we talk to each other about, right? Talk to your workmates about. If, in fact, you didn't stop somebody from telling a joke and you feel badly, find somebody, especially in the organization, to say, you know what just happened to me today? I can't believe it. I just let that go by. And here's why I did. I feel crummy. Is there something I should have done, or is there something I now can do to say to the other listeners, I didn't say anything when so-and-so made that comment, but did you feel awkward too? That is, do work every day that undermines the sustainability of patriarchy wherever we are. Thank you very much.